This special work session on AO number 37. We'll begin by going around and making introductions. We'll start with you, Mr. Will.
William Earnhardt, Assistant Municipal Attorney.
Danielle Fegley, Employee Relations Director.
W.O. Sander, Assembly.
Adam Trombley, Assembly.
Bill Starr, Assembly.
Duke Trainee, Assembly.
Cheryl Frasca, Assembly.
Chris Birch, Assembly.
Jennifer Johnson, Assembly.
Ernie Hall, Assembly.
Ken Sullivan, Mayor.
Elvie Gray Jackson.
Paul Holman, Assembly.
And Mr. Flynn will be joining us in about 30 minutes. What I'm going to do before I hand the program over is I'm going to ask my fellow Assembly members. We've been asked to make notes, questions that we want to ask, let the presentation be done. Then I'll go back to each individual member to cover any and all questions that you've got. Just for being able to do consistency and continuation in giving the presentation that's going to be given. So I ask that courtesy of you and Mr. Mayor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Assembly members and everyone in attendance. I'm going to give some brief opening remarks. We will be accompanied by some PowerPoint slides. We will then turn the program over to Mr. Earnhardt, and he'll be walking through the ordinance literally page by page. And then at the end, we do have another handout that kind of summarizes the key points. Just to give some background, over the last, well, 3.70, as we all know, is the rules and procedures regarding our labor negotiations. These have not been reviewed or amended in 24 years. And as we all know, in that quarter century of time, a lot of changes have gone on in the world, and it's timely for us to upgrade this particular code to reflect some of those changes. We've also, over the 3.5 years of my administration, have heard sometimes on a daily basis from my department heads, from the municipal manager, from the CFO, just how difficult it has been with all the varying rules and inconsistencies that exist within the CBAs, including in some cases where the practices going on actually violate the CBA, but because they've been past practices, they become the norm. And we're trying to straighten all that out so that we have a very consistent set of rules and regulations regarding how we manage our workforce. This has become really more clear now as we've been implementing Kronos and SAP. We've discovered many things that are simply improper, in violation of the CBAs, and just bad practice altogether. So the goal, of course, is to fix that. It's we want to make sure our labor agreements are consistent wherever possible, simple to understand, and simple to implement. We want to be fair to the employees. We want to be fair to the people who manage the employees. We want to be fair to the people out there who give us their hard-earned tax dollars to make sure that we manage that money efficiently. So this ordinance continues my administration's goals to be as an effective and efficient administration as we can possibly be, and be responsible to the folks that we report to. So the first slide just gives a little bit of background. The Assembly's responsibility to effectively budget and control spending. And part of that goes with what I mentioned about upgrading our codes to make sure they really reflect contemporary standards and best practices. We also want to make sure we're in compliance with federal and state regulations. And as always, we want to improve the fiscal health of the city. Next slide. One of the things that the Assembly has responsibility to do is give the administration guidance as we do enter into labor negotiations. Oftentimes this is done through a resolution. Sometimes, as is necessary, we feel now, after again a quarter century of no amendments to this, sometimes it's important to do it through an ordinance. The internal focus, as I mentioned, we want to improve business processes. We've been working on that for going on 3.5 years now. And we want to establish uniformity, as we will go ahead and get into later in the slides. You'll see some of the examples, which goes to show that the uniformity is going to be very important going forward. And again, fair, consistent, simple, standardized. One of the things that, as with anything, obviously this is an ordinance that makes changes that affect folks, and so immediately there's some misconceptions that get thrown out there. So one of the purposes of our work sessions is to do our best to clear up any misconceptions. You get urban myths literally floating through the airwaves, and it's good for us to see if we can do our best to answer any and all questions and clear up any misconceptions that are out there. Obviously, it does not eliminate public unions, does not amend, alter, or avoid any existing labor agreement, no reduction in base wages, no impact to step increases within classification pay range, service recognition and longevity pay grandfathered into the program, and unions can opt out of the municipal benefit program if they so choose. One of the things that we're going to move is a small amendment in it. It's number one, under the managed, we'll get into managed competition a little bit later, and there was a question about, is EMS in or out? Is that one of the things? EMS is excluded from any consideration of managed competition. The second thing is, there was a section that was removed regarding integration of EMS and firefighters because it referred to a bunch of different agreements, and we're more than willing to put in just a one-liner that says the integration plan that was implemented a number of years ago remains intact. So if that answers any questions about EMS and the integration of fire and EMS personnel, and EMS not being subject to managed competition review. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Earnhardt, and we don't have slides on this because it's hard to look at a slide and read a paper at the same time. So just if everybody will walk through their ordinance, which is in front of them, we'll be doing that literally page by page.
Will, if I might, prior to your beginning, I want the record to reflect that Mr. Flynn has joined us.
All right, good afternoon. We'll walk through this somewhat page by page. Actually, it might, well, we've got an audience, I say it might be easier to stand and talk, but either way.
Just talk loud.
I'm going to highlight the changes and try to highlight how they interact with each other, or the purposes of the change, or the intended purpose of the change, to kind of give us a groundwork. This is a large ordinance, it's a large document. At the end of the day, it's fairly simple concepts, but sometimes if you look at one part and don't see how it relates to the others, then it can be a little bit difficult. Obviously, the first page, there's not a lot to discuss there. The second page is the definitions, and I'll discuss this all as one section of 3 pages of definitions. A lot of this was housekeeping. The utilities now being part of the municipality were brought in. That got rid of some definitions. A number of other definitions were holdovers from other issues back in 1988-89 that were no longer relevant. The big ones I think people are probably interested in are confidential employee and supervisory employee. There's been relatively small changes to the definitions, however they emphasize management rights in regard to scheduling, and we'll pick up this a little bit in section 40 that goes through who's not subject to collective bargaining, but the confidential, the IT, the confidential information, somewhat strengthened on the management rights. Again, these definitions are something, even if we go to the NLRB and all their guidance, what a supervisory employee is still a very gray area. There's a lot of, you know it when you see it. We still have in the process of if management and the bargaining unit can't agree as to how to classify somebody, and we can't resolve it voluntarily, we can go to the ERB and have them say what the proper classification is, and that is whether to be in a bargaining unit or not. Second issue on definitions is, as the mayor touched upon, direct fire protection services means all employees who perform direct firefighting operations, and I think we're going to have an amendment to add and EMS employees, just to clarify that. That and the direct law enforcement definition both are simply for the purposes of outlining what can't be in the managed competition section, which we'll address later. The third key change in definitions is direct labor cost, and we're defining that term. And the idea there, as I understand it, is to have more transparency, that when the assembly looks at a contract and what it means over the long term or the near term, they're given a direct labor cost, which includes benefits, includes add-ons. It's not simply, this was a 2.5% wage increase. It also includes all those other things that go into what that contract costs. And later, as we get into a couple other points in this ordinance, you'll see how that is used to at least help more properly evaluate see how this is affecting our budget. It's not made in a decisions aren't made in a vacuum. I've heard a number of comments through the grapevine regarding this ordinance, although a lot of the comments I've heard don't resemble the ordinance I've read, but I've heard some concern regarding emergency declaration. That's already defined in our code under section 380.010, and what we've just put in here is the mayor has a few more powers to control equipment and personnel should there be a large earthquake or other catastrophe. As a practical matter, I would expect that that's not much of an issue. The bargaining units generally step up to the plate when that happens. There's a definition for managed competition. I will touch upon that when we get to the actual managed competition section. Page 5, again, supervisory employee, we've already touched upon. The next section, 020, is several declarations of policy. In the general...
Page 6?
Yeah, starts on page 5, goes to page 6. Yeah. I have about 100 versions of this on my floor right now, but we left in the general overall policies that already existed, but there's been outlined a number of other policies in the municipality to give guidance both in negotiations and assembly approval of contracts, and to set the framework of what labor in Anchorage means. Number C, managed competition program. I know there's a lot of concern about that, and we'll discuss that more later when we've got some PowerPoint slides that go into some of these more meaty issues. But that's not implemented in this ordinance. This is simply allowing for it in contracts. And what managed competition is, it's used in a number of cities around the nation. And the bargaining unit bids for work versus private sector bidders who may be interested in it. Generally, the bargaining unit gets the work because the bargaining unit knows the work, knows where the efficiencies are. But it generally does either result in savings or more services. Section D, limitation on direct labor cost increases. This is that direct labor cost, that all-inclusive definition, compared to the 5-year CPIU. And this is not a absolutely hard cap. People looked at ways to make it like the tax cap or other things that are a very hard cap. The hard part is, one, working out what those numbers are. Is it this contract? Is it all the contracts this year? Is it all the contracts in play? What are the numbers? But what it does is give guidance to the assembly that this is the policy of the municipality, that we're not going to exceed the cost of living with our overall increases, and gives guidance to find ways if a contract goes up, we have to find somewhere else to save the money. Section E, employee benefits. We have, and more later with the PowerPoints, but there's 600 benefit plans, 680 I've heard one term, but either way we've got way too many combinations, and it makes for tremendous administrative costs. It makes it very difficult for us to go into the market to buy additional coverages or administration or anything else. It also, it's really absolutely absurd that almost every employee has a different way of doing their benefits. Going on to page 7, section F, payments on services to a union. This is stated policy of the municipality that union work is to be paid by the union, and non-union work will be paid by the municipality, and allows for shop stewards to keep track of their time, something that actually exists in most of our collective bargaining agreements, but has not been followed in the past for the most part. Section G, uniform holidays. This one shouldn't be too controversial. However, what we have is almost from contract to contract, we have some variation. Standard number of holidays, I believe, is 11 for non-rep executive and a number of the unions. Other unions have 11 or 12. One has 12, excuse me, some have 12, some have 13, 13.5. And even within the ones that have the same number of holidays, there may be big differences on which holiday is recognized or what day it's recognized on. And it makes it impossible for supervisors, especially some of our business units have 2 or 3 unions represented. Who's going to be in on Stewart's Day? And how are they going to be paid? And what day do they recognize it on? H, pay enhancements limited. I know people have a lot of concerns about that, and there'll be more discussion. This is not a, well, one, as the mayor touched upon, longevity and service recognition are still grandfathered as they were before. Performance pay will be frozen at whatever the current level attained is, but the policy of the municipality is that people be paid for their classification and for their qualifications, not simply for having time at the municipality. What is not in here is the current classification